I never thought I'd be fighting for my home in the way I am right now. But here I am, standing in front of the very place I thought was my safe haven, ready to watch it all disappear because some woman thinks she can push me around. It all started with a simple notice in the mail, but that wasn't enough for Karen Thompson. She had to go further, much further. I was living my dream, my retreat from the chaos of the world, and suddenly it felt like the ground beneath me was shifting. My name's Jack Hamilton, and I'm a former Army engineer who spent years overseas, serving in ways most people will never understand. I came back from my last tour, ready to find peace, a place to call my own. So, I bought this cabin, right by the lake, with views that could calm the stormiest of minds. Property meant dealing with paperwork and rules, but I never expected to be at war with the very system meant to protect us. It wasn't until I got that letter from the HOA that I realized how much trouble I was in. Violation notice. Failure to comply with community standards, it said. What they didn't know was that I wasn't just any homeowner. I wasn't just some guy who showed up and played by the rules. No, I was Jack Hamilton, and my name carried more weight than they could ever imagine. But that letter was just the beginning. That's when Karen Thompson, the president of the HOA, decided she had the right to do whatever she wanted. She wasn't happy with just sending a letter. No, she had to call the cops, show up at my doorstep, and try to 16 my cabin. The nerve. She thought she could take it from me because she didn't like the way I lived, didn't like the fact that I didn't fit her suburban ideal. She thought she could bulldoze over me and get away with it. But she didn't know who she was dealing with. She didn't know that I owned the county. Literally. My family's land stretched far beyond what anyone knew, and I had the power to make her regret every move she made. I had a feeling this wasn't going to be just another HOA dispute. This was personal. She had no idea that. I was in control of more than she could possibly understand. As I watched the cops pull up to my property, ready to enforce a ridiculous demand, I stood there, calm. I knew what was coming next. What they didn't know was that I was about to turn the tables in a way they couldn't possibly expect. I stood there, watching the officers as they approached, wondering if they really understood what they were about to do. Karen Thompson had called them in like I was some criminal. I could feel the tightness in my chest, but I didn't show it. I couldn't. I was trained for high-stress situations, and this was nothing compared to the pressure I'd faced overseas. But this was different. This was my home, my land, and Karen thought she could just waltz in and take it. The officers got out of their patrol car, looking confused but ready to do their jobs. I could tell they didn't want to be here. They were just doing what they had been told. One of them, Officer Parker, was an older guy, probably nearing retirement. He looked at me, then back at the cabin, as if he was weighing the situation in his mind. "Mr. Hamilton, we have a court order," he said, holding up a piece of paper. "We need to seize your property." I took a deep breath. This wasn't how I expected things to go, but it didn't surprise me. Karen had been trying to push her weight around ever since she got elected HOA president. She had this smug look about her, like she owned the place. But what she didn't know was that I did. I had inherited more than just the land this cabin sat on. I owned the entire county, the water rights, the roads, everything that connected to this little piece of paradise. No one knew, not even Karen. She didn't realize that when she went up against me, she was playing a game she couldn't win. "I understand," I said, keeping my voice calm. "But you're mistaken if you think you can just take my property." I stepped forward, my boots crunching the gravel beneath my feet. "You see, I own more than just this cabin. I own the entire county. Every road, every inch of land. This is my land, and I decide what happens here, not you." Officer Parker looked at me like I was joking, but I wasn't. The other officer, younger and with a nervous look on his face, started glancing at his partner, unsure what to do. I could tell he wasn't buying Karen's story. He had no idea who I was. He didn't know what kind of power I held. I had the deed, the paperwork, and the law on my side. I wasn't some guy who was going to let a little HOA bully me around. "I'm going to need you to step back, Mr. Hamilton," Officer Parker said, holding up his hand like he was trying to keep things civil. "We have a job to do." I smiled. "No, you don't," I said, "because you're about to learn something about this land that you don't know. You're about to find out who really has the power here." I turned and walked toward the cabin, leaving them standing there, unsure what to do. They were here to take my home, but they didn't realize the only thing they were taking was Karen's power. I had a plan, and it wasn't going to be pretty for her. The next move was mine. The next move would be the one that changed everything. I could feel the tension building in the air as I stepped inside my cabin, the place I'd poured years of memories into. The officers were still standing outside, unsure of how to proceed, as I walked over to the desk and pulled out the deed to my property. It was time for Karen to realize just how wrong she was. I wasn't just a homeowner. I was the man who owned everything around me. As I held the deed in my hand, I could almost hear her, smug and certain, thinking she could push me around. She didn't know it yet, but I was about to end this game. The officers hadn't fully realized what was happening, but they didn't know that I owned every piece of land surrounding this cabin, including the road they had driven in on. They didn't know that the power Karen thought she had was nothing compared to what I could do. Change everything. The line rang twice before someone picked up. "This is Jack Hamilton," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I need to speak with the head of the land records office. It's urgent." A moment later, a familiar voice came through the line. "Mr. Hamilton, this is Linda. How can I help you?" I took a deep breath. "I need you to pull up the full record of my property holdings. I need the deed, the water rights, everything. It's time to remind some people who really own this land." Linda paused for a moment, then said, "Of course, Mr. Hamilton. I'll have it ready for you in a few minutes." I hung up the phone and turned to the officers, who were now looking at me with growing uncertainty. "I don't think you understand the situation," I said calmly. "I own everything here. I own the county, the land, the roads, the water rights. They all belong to me." Officer Parker blinked, clearly taken aback. "What are you talking about? This cabin is on private property, and we have a legal order." "This cabin is my property," I interrupted. "But that's not all. I own the land surrounding it, and I've just called to have all the documents sent over. If you want to enforce Karen's order, you'll need to deal with the full weight of my legal ownership." The younger officer shifted nervously on his feet, still not quite understanding the depth of the situation. I knew it was time for me to take control. I've spent years building this place. I've fought for everything I have. And now, I'm going to take back what's mine. The only thing I need from you is for you to leave. There was a long silence as the officers exchanged looks, unsure how to respond. It was clear they didn't want to be in the middle of this, but Karen had already dragged them into a situation they couldn't handle. Officer Parker spoke first. "We're just doing our job, Mr. Hamilton. But if you're telling us that this is your property," "It is," I said firmly, "and I'll make sure that Karen understands that." With a few more hesitant words, the officers turned and walked back to their patrol car. As I watched them drive away, I couldn't help but felt a surge of satisfaction. This was just the beginning. Karen thought she could bully me into submission, but she didn't know that I had the power to stop her. And now, she was going to find out exactly what that power meant. I sat down at my desk, staring at the paperwork in front of me. The deed, the water rights, the land records, everything I needed to prove I was right. I had been waiting for this moment, but now that it was here, I couldn't help but feel a strange calm wash over me. I'd fought for this place, worked hard to build it into what it was. It was more than just a cabin to me. It was my legacy. Karen had underestimated that. She thought she could push me around, but she didn't know who she was messing with. It was almost noon. The documents Linda had promised were due to arrive soon, and I was ready to make my move. I said when she picked up, "I need those records now." She didn't hesitate. "They're on their way to you, Mr. Hamilton. They should be there within the hour." I listened, feeling a sense of purpose build within me. This was it. Karen had crossed a line, and now it was time to make sure she understood just how far she had gone. The next step was clear. I needed to take control of the situation. I sat back in my chair, taking a deep breath. I had been calm this whole time, but now it was time to be strategic. I had the power. I had the right. And I wasn't going to let someone like Karen push me around. I had the law on my side, and I wasn't going to stop until I made sure she knew exactly who she was dealing with. My phone buzzed. It was a text from Linda. "The documents are on your doorstep now." I smiled. It was time. I grabbed my jacket, walked outside, and stepped onto the porch. The envelope was there, just as she had promised. I picked it up and opened it slowly, pulling out the thick stack of papers that contained everything I needed. As I flipped through the pages, my mind raced. I had the power to take Karen down. I had the proof I needed to shut her down once and for all. I wasn't just going to let her get away with this. I was going to make sure she understood that I wasn't someone she could manipulate. I walked back inside, holding the documents in my hands. The next move was mine. It was time to send a message. I stared down at the documents in my hands, my fingers tracing the ink on the paper. Every line, every signature, everything I needed to put an end to this was right here. The weight of it all was clear now. This wasn't just about protecting my cabin anymore. This was about taking back control. It was time to make sure Karen Thompson learned her lesson. I took a moment to look out the window once more. The view from here had always calmed me, but now it felt like a symbol of everything I had to lose. This was my family's legacy, my peace. Karen had no idea what she had stirred up. I picked up my phone and dialed the number I had been holding off calling until now, the one that would bring everything together. "Linda," I said when she answered. "It's time. I need you to contact the HOA and make them aware of the situation." She didn't ask questions, just replied with a sharp, "Understood, Mr. Hamilton. I'll take care of it." The next few moments felt like they dragged on forever as I waited for Linda to work her magic. It wasn't long before I received a text from her. "The HOA board has been notified. Karen's claim is being reviewed." A surge of relief flooded over me, but I knew this wasn't over yet. Karen had caused enough trouble to make this battle last longer than it should have. I grabbed the envelope with the deed and walked toward the front door. This was the final step. I needed to make sure she couldn't come back. As I stepped outside, I saw her house in the distance, her pristine property that she was so proud of. I could picture her now, sitting at her desk, thinking she had control over everything, completely unaware of how the tables were about to turn. I made my way to my truck and got in, the engine starting with a low rumble. I drove toward the HOA office, my mind clear and focused. It was time to end this. I parked in front of the building, took a deep breath, and walked inside, holding the envelope tight in my hand. The receptionist looked up as I approached, her expression one of mild surprise. "Can I help you, sir?" she asked, her voice polite. "I'm here to see Karen Thompson," I said, my voice steady. The receptionist hesitated for a moment, clearly unsure, but then picked up the phone. A moment later, Karen herself appeared in the doorway, her face frozen in surprise as she saw me standing there. "Mr. Hamilton," she said, her voice dripping with fake sweetness. "What can I do for you?" I didn't hesitate. I held out the envelope. "You can start by reading this," I said. "It's time you learned exactly who you've been messing with." Karen took the envelope from me, her eyes scanning the papers quickly. Her face went pale as she realized what she was holding. She looked up at me, her usual arrogance replaced by shock. "You," she began, but I cut her off. "I own this land, Karen. I own the county. And you've just made the biggest mistake of your life." The silence between us was thick, the weight of the moment sinking in. I watched her face twist with frustration as she realized she couldn't back out now. The power had shifted. It was my turn to call the shots, and Karen knew it. Karen's face turned ashen as she held the envelope in her hands, staring at the pages as if she were reading something she couldn't comprehend. For a moment, I thought she might just crumble, but instead, she straightened her back and forced a tight smile. "This is some sort of joke, right?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. I shook my head, the weight of my words settling between us. "This is no joke, Karen. You've been playing games with the wrong person." Her smile faltered, and I could see the wheels turning in her mind, trying to figure out how to spin this into something that worked in her favor. But I wasn't about to give her that chance. "I own the land, the roads, and every inch of this county," I continued, my voice firm, "and I'm done letting you manipulate people and push them around." She dropped the envelope onto her desk, her fingers tapping nervously against the edge of the paper. "You can't just," she started, but I cut her off. "You can't just take what's mine," I said. "You tried to seize my property, Karen. You tried to force me out, and now it's my turn. I'm going to make sure everyone knows exactly who has the power here." Karen's eyes narrowed as she processed the situation, her mind clearly racing for a way out. She wasn't used to losing control, especially not in such a public way. I could see the frustration mounting in her face, but I didn't care. She had pushed me too far, and now it was time to settle this once and for all. "I'm going to make sure your little reign over the HOA is over," I said calmly, standing tall in front of her desk. "You don't control this place anymore." The silence stretched between us, and for a moment, I thought she might make some sort of last-ditch effort to save face. But instead, she just stood there, her jaw clenched tight as the reality of the situation set in. "I don't think you understand what you're doing," she said after a long pause. You're ruining everything. You can't just change everything overnight. I smiled, a hint of satisfaction creeping into my expression. Oh, but I can. You see, Karen, I don't need permission to do what's mine. I don't need anyone's approval. And as for you, well, I'm making sure you never have the power to threaten anyone again. The words hung in the air, heavy with finality. She didn't reply, but I could see the anger building behind her eyes. It was clear now that Karen understood the full weight of the situation. She had been outplayed. As I turned to walk out of the office, I couldn't help but feel a sense of victory. The tables had turned. I had taken control, and I wasn't going to stop until Karen realized just how much she had underestimated me. I drove back to the cabin, the wind in my hair and the weight of what had just happened settling in. Karen Thompson had been so sure of herself, so confident that she could run the HOA like her own little kingdom. But now, she was realizing that her grip on the community was slipping, and it wasn't going to be easy for her to get it back. I could almost hear the frustration in her voice as she tried to argue her way out of this, but I wasn't listening. She had shown her colors true anymore, and I wasn't going to let her push me around. I reached the cabin and stepped out of the truck, the sound of gravel crunching beneath my boots grounding me. I knew I had a lot of work ahead of me, but for the first time in what felt like forever, I felt a sense of peace, casting a golden glow over the land. The quiet beauty of the place reminded me why I had fought so hard to keep it. I wasn't going to let someone like Karen destroy it. I stepped inside and went straight to my desk. The next move was clear. I had to make sure the rest of the HOA knew that things were going to change. I wasn't just a homeowner anymore. I was in charge. The power had shifted, and it was time for me to take control. I grabbed my phone and called Linda again. It's time, I said, my voice calm but determined. I need you to set up a meeting with the board. It's time to make some changes. Linda didn't ask any questions, just replied with a simple, I'll take care of it. I hung up and leaned back in my chair, staring out the window. I had come so far, and now I was finally going to get what I deserved. I could feel the weight of the decision pressing down on me, but it was the right one. I had worked hard for this land, and no one was going to take it from me. The board would have no choice but to accept my terms. They had already made their mistake by siding with Karen, and now it was time for them to realize who was really in charge. The meeting would be the turning point. I was done being the underdog. I was done letting people push me around. This was my land, my community, and I was going to make sure everyone knew it. I sat there for a few more minutes, letting the silence fill the room. I didn't need to rush. The plan was in motion, and soon, Karen would learn that she wasn't the one calling the shots anymore. The meeting was set for the following morning. I walked into the HOA office, my heart steady and calm, but my mind sharp. The room was already filled with board members, their faces a mix of uncertainty and curiosity as they tried to figure out what I was doing there. Karen, of course, was sitting at the head of the table, her arms crossed, her expression as tight as ever. But there was a flicker of something in her eyes now, a mix of frustration and fear, as if she realized this meeting wasn't going to go the way she had planned. I stood at the door for a moment, letting the tension build. The weight of what I was about to do felt heavy, but I was resolute. The power had shifted, and this was my moment to take full control. I walked to the table and set the envelope down in front of Karen. The silence in the room was deafening as everyone stared at the papers, unsure of what to expect. Karen, I said, my voice steady, I think it's time we set the record straight. She looked at the envelope, then back at me, trying to mask her unease with a forced smile. I don't know what this is about, Jack, but I can assure you, I'm still the president of the HOA. I didn't flinch. Not anymore. I replied, my words cutting through her bravado. You've made too many mistakes, Karen. You've tried to manipulate the system, bully people into submission, and push your own agenda without regard for the rules. But those days are over. The room was silent now, every eye on me as I slowly unfolded the papers. I could feel the weight of the moment as I laid out the full extent of my ownership over the land, the roads, and the entire community. I didn't need to explain it all. The documents spoke for themselves. Karen's face went pale as she read the pages. I could see the reality settling in. She was no longer the powerful figure she thought she was. She had no hold over this community anymore. You've been running things like you own everything, I continued. But you've forgotten something important. This community isn't just yours. It's ours. And now, it's time for change. Karen's hands trembled as she set the papers down. You can't do this, she said, but her voice lacked conviction. I can't, I said firmly. And I will. I'm raising the dues. I'm making the decisions. And I'm taking control of the HOA, starting now. The other board members shifted in their seats, unsure of how to react. Some of them looked uncomfortable, others seemed relieved. They knew Karen had been abusing her power, and now they saw that someone else was finally stepping up to make things right. Karen opened her mouth to protest, but no words came out. She had no arguments left, no way to spin this into something she could control. The power had shifted completely. This is over, Karen, I said, my voice low but certain. You're no longer in charge, and you'll have to answer for everything you've done. Karen sat back in her chair, defeated. I could see the defeat in her eyes, the realization that she had lost. The community was mine now, and nothing was going to take it from me. I turned and walked out of the room, leaving her sitting there, trying to grasp the reality of it all. This was just the beginning. There was still work to be done, but the first battle was over, and I had won. The days following the meeting felt like a blur, the dust slowly settling as I started to put my plans into action. The once uneasy tension that had gripped the community was now replaced with a quiet anticipation. The people who had been silently watching Karen's rule were finally starting to breathe a little easier. It was clear they had been waiting for someone to step up, and now that I had, there was no turning back. The HOA members who had once sided with Karen were now looking to me for direction. They could see the power shift, and they knew that things were going to be different from now on. It wasn't about revenge. It was about restoring balance and making sure that the community I loved remained in the right hands. I spent the next few weeks carefully reviewing every piece of paperwork, every decision Karen had made during her time in control. Files, I heard a knock at the door. I looked up to see Linda standing in the doorway, her expression unreadable. You've made quite the impression, she said, stepping inside and closing the door behind her. Karen's lawyers have already started making calls. They're not happy about what happened. I nodded slowly. I had expected this. Karen wouldn't just roll over, and I knew she'd try to fight back. But I was prepared. Let them come, I said, my voice calm but firm. This is my land, my community. I'm not backing down. Linda raised an eyebrow, clearly impressed. You're not afraid of the fight? She asked. Not at all, I replied, leaning back in my chair. This is about what's right. I've worked too hard for this place to let someone like Karen take it from me. Over the next few days, things began to unfold. Karen tried everything in her power to reverse the decisions I had made, even going so far as to hire a team of lawyers to challenge my authority. But every move she made was met with resistance. The community supported me, and the legal documents I had were solid. Karen's case slowly began to fall apart. As the weeks passed, I could feel the weight lifting off my shoulders. The community started to feel more like home again. People were finally able to enjoy their properties without fear of Karen's oppressive rule. The atmosphere had shifted, and it was clear that the change I had brought was for the better. Karen, on the other hand, was beginning to crack under the pressure. Her influence was dwindling, and she found herself isolated from the very people she had once manipulated. I had expected her to fight harder, to do everything in her power to regain control, but it seemed like she had underestimated just how much I was willing to fight for what was mine. One day, as I walked through the neighborhood, I couldn't help but smile. The lake shimmered in the distance, the sun casting a warm glow over the land I had fought so hard to keep. This was my home. The people here were my people, and I wasn't about to let anyone take that away. Karen's time was over. My time had just begun.